On January the 3rd, 2026, the United States military executed Operation Absolute Resolve, removing Nicolas Maduro from power. The headlines told you this was about narcoterrorism. They told you it was about restoring democracy. But if you look at the bond markets, the story is very different. Within hours of the capture, Venezuelan sovereign bonds, essentially worthless pieces of paper for the last 8 years, doubled in value. Wall Street wasn't celebrating justice. They were celebrating a liquidation event. Here is the paradox that the news isn't explaining. The United States is currently the largest oil producer in human history. It produces over 13 million barrels a day. It's practically energy independent. So why would the US risk a massive geopolitical conflict to seize a country whose oil industry has collapsed by 75%? The answer isn't about how much oil America has, it's about physics. And to understand this invasion, you have to understand the difference between champagne and molasses. This is the villain of our story. Not a politician, but a machine. The complex refineries of the US Gulf Coast. These massive industrial cathedrals were built decades ago, designed with a specific diet in mind. They were engineered to eat heavy sour crude, thick, sulfur-rich sludge. Then, the fracking revolution happened. The US started pumping record amounts of oil. But there was a problem. Shale oil is light and sweet. It's thin, like champagne. You might think oil is oil, but to a refinery trying to run a heavy crude facility on light shale oil is like trying to run a diesel truck on jet fuel. It destroys the margins. For years, US refineries have been starving for heavy crude. They used to get it from Venezuela. When sanctions cut that off, they had to buy it from Russia, until the Ukraine war stopped that. Then, they became dangerously dependent on Canada. By capturing Maduro, the US didn't just remove a dictator. They secured the only massive source of heavy crude that can travel to Texas by ship in under 5 days. This wasn't a war for energy, it was a war for chemistry. But there is a second layer to this operation, one that explains the timing. It's about debt. For the last decade, Venezuela hasn't really owned its oil. China owns the oil. Beijing loaned Venezuela over $60 billion to build infrastructure. But Venezuela didn't pay it back in cash. They paid it back in oil. Shipments of crude left Venezuelan ports and went straight to China to service the debt. At least $10 billion is still outstanding. By physically seizing the country and its infrastructure, the United States has effectively foreclosed on China's collateral. 2 days after the raid, Chinese supertankers in the Caribbean turned around. The oil that was supposed to pay off Beijing is now being diverted to fill the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is at historic lows. This is the geopolitical equivalent of a margin call. The US has essentially told the world, the Monroe Doctrine is back. The oil in this hemisphere belongs to this hemisphere. So what happens next? Rebuilding Venezuela's oil industry will cost $100 billion. The US taxpayer isn't going to pay that. The Venezuelan people don't have it. Enter the private sector. We are seeing the rise of a new model, sovereign receivership. Just like a bankrupt company is taken over by creditors, Venezuela is being taken over by its bondholders and US energy giants. Figures like Eric Prince have long proposed privatizing aspects of US intervention, from border control to regime stability. This is why the bonds rallied. The market believes that Venezuela is no longer a sovereign country, but a distressed asset being restructured by American management. The intervention in Venezuela wasn't about drugs, it was a strategic merger and acquisition. The US needed the heavy oil to save its refineries. It needed to evict China from the Caribbean, and it used the world's most powerful military to close the deal. In the world of macroeconomics, morality is often just a line item on a balance sheet. And in 2026, the rent came due. Most people look at this event and see a war, but now you see a supply chain correction. The news will tell you what happened. But if you want to understand the financial physics of why it happened, make sure you subscribe. See you next time.